From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
To what extent do you think that your determination to fight the tabloids destroyed the relationship with your family?
I think there's, that's certainly a central piece to it. But that's a hard question to answer, because anything I say about my family results in a torrent of abuse from the press. I've made it very clear that this is something that needs to be done. It would be nice if we, did it as a family. I believe that, again, from a service standpoint, and when you're in a public role, that these are the things that we should be doing for the greater good. But I'm doing this. I'm doing this for my reasons.
Prince Harry's always had a tricky relationship with the press. Growing up firmly in the spotlight will do that to you. Also, having parents go through a messy and much discussed divorce. And at the age of just 12, being told that your mother, Princess Diana, had been killed in a car crash after being chased by the paparazzi through Paris. "28 years on, though, Harry turns 40 on the 15th of this month. How different is the now Californian Duke of Sussex? We've had conflicting reports of a possible return to the UK.
If Harry wants to come back, truly to have a better connection with the family, with the institution, and is perhaps having doubts about the way in which the split with the royal family happened, he needs to do it soon, because it's not going to happen with King William on the throne.
Time to reassess or double down. The story today, Harry at 40. Time to reconcile?
So I'm Kate Mansey. I'm the assistant editor at The Times and the royal editor for the paper.
And you've been on the royal beat for a while?
I have. I dabbled in it, and as all kind of journalists on Fleet Street end up doing from time to time, but really sort of joined the beat properly, I'd say, in 2011.
And you were reporting early on in the year, potential trouble at Mill.
So in February, I wrote a piece about Harry talking to friends back in the UK about ways in which he might offer to help. This was in the aftermath of the King's cancer diagnosis, of course. Harry was really quick to come back to see his father as soon as possible. He had that very short visit with his father at Clarence House. It lasted less than an hour, but Harry was determined he was going to see his father. Once he'd learned the news, he wanted to come and see him face to face, which I think is to his credit. And a few weeks after that, I was being told that he was sort of making overtures to friends and aides back here that if he was needed, he was happy to help in some way, which
sounds so generous.
Not to come back and kind of do the day-to-day and the ribbon cutting, but I think, he never really wanted to leave fully anyway, but was told he couldn't have this part in, part out experience. You're either with us doing the day job or you're not. You can't go off and pick and choose the things that you wanted to do. And I think Harry always thought that he might have some sort of Commonwealth realm, particularly Meghan having lived in Canada, and he's done so well on all the foreign tours he's ever done, that maybe with obviously Kate's illness and the King's illness, he could maybe pick up some of that slack. And that was sort of, it was all in the kind of the ether of these sort of mixed messages that he didn't want to come back per se, but was happy. He was letting it be known he was happy to help out. And then we had this story coming back again at the end of August that he was telling friends back here, trying to make those connections back here again. He's still battling with the Home Office. He wants the security every time he's here, his automatic right to security, not on a case-by-case basis. He wants a connection to his home country still. He hasn't shut that door in his mind, and I think that's what that's telling us.
We're talking about Harry in particular because he's turning 40, which I can already feel will make some listeners feel absolutely ancient at the thought. One thing we know about him, a thread that runs through him, is that mistrust of the press, which goes obviously all the way back to the circumstances around his mother's death. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's sort of really where he first came on young Kate Mansey's radar, was the funeral of his mum, when we saw him walking behind the coffin, those really sort of heartbreaking, dramatic images.
I think everyone remembers where they were when they saw that funeral of Princess Diana. In 1997, when Diana died at the end of August, and then the funeral was in September, I was 16 years old at that stage, had an idea that I might want to be a journalist, but had no idea that I'd end up writing so much about the royal family. But I think, like a lot of people, I was watching that funeral on television, and it had, it stayed with me in the way that it stays with anybody. How can you not feel incredibly moved by two young people, two young boys walking behind their mother's funeral in such a public way, in such a moving, ceremonial pathway to saying goodbye to her in such a public fashion?
Prince William with his head bowed, Charles Spencer, the little figure of the red-headed Prince Harry, and the Prince of Wales.
Harry with his head, he had the sort of fringe over his eyes, walking down, and I think everyone's hearts just went out to them, which sounds very trite to say, but it's not. I think there's so much involved with our relationship with the royal family that we look to the family as a kind of beacon of Britishness. But of course they are just that. They are a family with their own, personal tensions, personal losses and loves.
Her two sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, who are said to have chosen for themselves to walk in this procession.
And to see Harry at that young age, and William, who was a similar age to me at the time, going through that.
Daunting, particularly for the young 12-year-old, soon to be 13, Prince Harry, on his father's right.
I was sitting on a sofa at my friend's house in Hertfordshire, looking at the scene on a television without, the media and the phones and the social media that we have today, of course, and just watching it unfold.
Prince Harry and Prince William with their father. How bravely they have done already.
It was just incredibly moving, and I think to see him at that juncture in his life, and then to follow him, as we all have, whatever you might think about the royal family, you'll be aware of Harry's progression to where he is now and on the outside of the family, and how that his reaction with the press, his reaction with the institution, the loss of his mother, this desire that she had unfinished business that he's going to finish, this idea that he's running out of time. Harry's now older than his mother. She died when she was just 36. This race against time with Harry is always there, in the way that anyone who's perhaps lost a parent at a young age, the mortality of our situation has stayed with him. And it's this burning desire to get on with things.
Do you find already that Prince William has a will of his own?
Well, he certainly does. I mean, he's a typical 3-year-old, because I work with 3-year-olds, and very enthusiastic about things, pushes himself right into it. He's not at all shy and very polite, extraordinary enough. Whereas perhaps Harry is more quieter and just watches. Whether he copies William, we wait and see, but he's certainly a different character altogether.
I just sort of make this point here, perhaps, that Diana has kind of driven a lot of what he's done. That was a kind of pivotal, defining moment for, obviously, the boys in their childhood, or as it would be for anybody who loses a mother at a young age. But I remember on the anniversary, or coming up to his 30th birthday, I teamed up with Andrew Morton to write a piece for the Sunday Times, which was called Harry the Royal Houdini, which now seems kind of unwittingly prophetic, that it was all about him making this great escape, that he had made the escape from the childhood and the ways in which he was portrayed in the press, and the ways, the things that he did, and not finding his groove, to becoming somebody who was really admired. I remember Andrew Morton saying to me that Harry had inherited Diana's optimistic streak, but also inherited her self-destructive genes. I thought that was really interesting coming from somebody who knew Diana so well.
Famously, the biographer that she'd engaged with quite a bit.
Yes, of course. The person who she had spoken to and initially denied it, but then it all came out that she had collaborated with Andrew on the book, on that famous book about her life. So I think that's interesting. And now we look at Harry the Royal Houdini in a different lens 10 years on, because he has made that escape. But does he want back in?
You've met Harry on a number of occasions, so we're going to sort of take a step back down memory lane and think about what has actually built him as he turns big 4-0. You first met him back in 2011, 2012 at Kensington Palace.
Must have been around that time. There was it was back when William and Kate and Harry all kind of shared offices, and they had a drinks reception for the press, quite a select group. And I was quite intrigued to go into Kensington Palace and see where the offices were. It was like a kind of old-fashioned office party. So, we're greeted with drinks and we're allowed to go around and chat. And the idea is that this is a kind of relaxed space where members of the royal family can meet members of the press. You can have a chat and really get to know what each other's thinking, but it stays in that kind of, in the vault. So it's not something you can report on, but you can say that it happened. And just the impression that I got from him then, without breaking those kind of rules of engagement, if you like, just somebody who is really passionate. I think people don't realise when you see Harry, and we see lots of members of the royal family on the picture, what their physical presence is like. But he's a big guy. He's a tall guy. He's very impressive. He's very charismatic. He's funny. He's interested in people, a bit like his grandfather before him, Prince Philip. He's got that kind of inquiring mind. He's not shy to ask you questions about what the paper's doing or what the website's doing or how it's working.
Yeah.
Or it's certainly not shy to tell you his own views on what you should be writing or how you should be writing it. And I think that just that kind of energy around him is something that maybe comes across in some of the pictures or the videos that you might see of Harry if you've never met him in person.
Very nice to meet you.
It's nice to have you back. How is it being here?
It's great. Just as the lights turned off. Perfect timing. It's great. It's amazing.
That kind of joie de vivre, that, everything that we know about Princess Diana is there in Harry, I'd say.
And this was, to sort of place it, this was pre-Meghan, this was sort of Cressida Bonus era, just to sort of...
Yeah, so he was dating, we know that he dated Cressida Bonus. He was dating Chelsea Davy before that.
Yes.
About 10 years ago, he was linked to Camilla Thurlow, who was Miss Edinburgh. I think she was, and a charity worker, extremely good-looking woman.
But this was sort of free and easy,
But it was
Harry.
before, this was post all the stories about him going to Vegas and things like that. He had settled down. He was now in his groove. He was the young man, he was charming everybody. He'd put all the kind of negative press in the background, it seemed, and he was sort of moving on with his life. But yes, it was pre-Meghan and obviously, the big fallout with the family. And there was no indication to me at that time that him and William would ever split ways. But obviously that came later.
Well, pop a pin in that because we'll get to that. You next spent a bit of time with him in 2013. He's been on a tour in Afghanistan and you're in Colorado with him. Tell me about that time and what did you sort of glean from that?
I remember it really well because he was looking at the Warrior Games, which is something that the Americans had set up for wounded servicemen and women.
A kind of precursor to the Invictus Games.
Exactly that. And he went and saw it and he said, this is brilliant because, these veterans have something to aim for and it helps with rehabilitation. And he said to one of the people, I'm going to do this in Britain. I'm going to take this quite unashamedly. So I'm going to take this idea and I'm going to take it back to Britain.
Thank you to everyone here for sort of providing such a warm welcome for myself and everybody from the UK. Charlie especially for producing another Warrior Games this year in 2013, and it's a huge honour for me to be here. A year ago, I was in Washington on the ambassador's lawn to plant a tree, which is what most of our family do nowadays. But after doing that, I had a chance to meet some of the US and UK teams.
And later that night, a few members of the press were invited to meet Harry in a kind of basement bar in Colorado. We all give him beers. He was sipping a glass of water because, by then he was really quite focused about what he wanted to do. And he elaborated on that theme that he was going to take this and take it back to Britain. He was full of ideas. He wanted wounded servicemen and women to be in the papers much, much more. He wanted more awareness about what they were going through. He wanted more help for them. He thought that the Americans were, doing this brilliant thing and that we could do it back in Britain. And shortly after that, he actually ended up writing a piece for us at the Sunday Times in which he described for the first time his experiences in Afghanistan, those 2 tours of duty, one of which was cut short by a press cock-up.
Of course.
When they revealed that he was out there, despite the fact that everyone had said that they wouldn't. I think it was an Australian publication. He obviously went away.
Australians, isn't it? Or French, I guess. But yeah.
So he was, another reason to be cross at the press, right? That he was trying to do what he wanted to do. But this energy that he had from that, and you could see this kind of light bulb behind his eyes. He was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that home. And within a year, to his absolute credit, he set it up not just as a British thing, but he widened it out to the whole world. And now, 10 years on, it's the 10th anniversary this year of the Invictus Games. But seeing him there and seeing him in that bar, completely clear-headed, moving around the press, telling everybody his plan, and it's the hand gestures with Harry. He's exuberant. And every time you go out with him, you're going to get a good picture. So we went to Brazil. He was playing beach volleyball on Copacabana Beach.
And competitive, Harry was always going to cross the try line. Not satisfied with the oval ball, the volleyball was next to challenge the third-in-line's hand-to-eye coordination.
And you just think this is going to make, as we say in newspapers, this is going to get into the paper or online. It's going to be a fantastic image. We're going to have loads of great words to write. And as a journalist, that's what you want. You want your stories to make.
Kate, we're going through the life and times of Prince Harry as he approaches his 40th birthday. We were just hearing about him in 2013 being, productive, happy, exuberant, you said. Let's forward wind through all about which we know what happened next in terms of his marriage, but then his split from the royal family and his departure to the United States, all the way to September 2022.
And I'm afraid to say in the last few moments, the following statement has been released. It reads, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
He was back because, of course, the late Queen had passed away, and he was back for the funeral. Compare and contrast, if you would, Harry, as you met him in Colorado, to the Harry that we saw in Westminster Abbey at the late Queen's funeral.
Obviously, it was going to be a more sombre occasion because of the circumstances, around the sad death of his grandmother, which, again, he's now playing back at Westminster Abbey, playing out a very private grief in the public sphere as he, surely there'd be memories of Diana there too. It was incredibly sad, I think, to see him on the outside. I'm not sure the royal family or the machine around it were particularly helpful in not letting him wear the uniform.
Settle a debate for us.
No, we have been ferociously arguing about this. And Prince Harry's not allowed to wear his military uniform.
Yeah. So what?
Because he basically checked out of the firm.
And dissed them and kicked them on the way out.
And kept kicking them.
He's no longer, obviously, a serving soldier, so he's not allowed to wear the uniform in that respect. Because he doesn't have those honorary military titles, that means because having stepped away from the royal family, he's not allowed to wear them. He was allowed to wear the uniform for the vigil, standing vigil, and that was the concession that was made by the king, who had, obviously, Charles had just come to the throne following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II.
We are hearing new details about Prince Harry. He will now be allowed to wear his military uniform when they hold another separate vigil on Saturday at Westminster Hall.
But he wasn't allowed the kind of Queen's insignia on the side of that uniform, which seemed unnecessarily harsh to many onlookers. And it just added to the kind of, I think, the bad sense between Harry and the family at a time when tensions were inevitably very high around the funeral.
And you get the sense that cut deep, especially the sort of uniform business.
Absolutely. And I think you look at Harry and Meghan at any of these public occasions, and she's a consummate actress. It's hard sometimes to tell exactly what she's thinking. She's got, very she can put the neutral face on or a slight smile. But Harry has never really been. His emotions are quite close to the surface. Because
quite leaky face.
Leaky face is a good way of putting it, Luke. I think it is. I think you can not quite read him like a book, but not far off. Again, I felt for him again. This time I was in Westminster Abbey for the funeral as a journalist, and it was hard to. Yeah, it was hard to watch in some respects. But there's also this feeling that he's done it to himself. He's taken himself away from the family.
As you said, tensions are quite high and everyone was slightly on edge around the funeral, understandably so. Were Team Sussex absolutely stum throughout all of that, or were you able to, I don't know, bounce some of this off them or get anything out of them at that time?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about aides going to work for the Sussexes and departing, and the kind of revolving door of staff that they've had at Archewell since they've moved to the States. One guy who's been there throughout is a guy called James Holt, who previously did PR for the Liberal Democrat Party and is a really sensible, very clever British guy who went out with the Sussexes, actually moved out there to continue to advise them. And he's someone who's been a stalwart throughout. Recently, they did an interview on US TV, and you could see him in the background meeting guests and things like that. So he's very much kind of part of that fabric. But anything around that time was, from both Prince Harry and Prince William's point of view, they were being very careful. There was a Fab Four moment, as it was dubbed, that perhaps this might be the thing that unites the brothers. We saw them, didn't we, going to look at the flowers that were laid by the crowds at Windsor. And it was thought that maybe this was a moment when the brothers might get back together. But behind the scenes, I was learning that the invitation had come quite late from William, and there was still quite a lot of sort of bad feeling between the two couples. And again, you could see it. You could see it on the faces that it wasn't quite the reunion that perhaps the media had hoped for, or that people had hoped for.
How much do you think the penny was dropping in Harry and maybe also Meghan's mind at that point? Because all of that business was actually the real first chunky moment where the fact you're outside of the club actually means something, and this is the consequence visible in the case of what uniform or what insignia you can or cannot wear. Do you think the penny sort of started to drop there?
Yeah, I think the penny started to drop perhaps from day one when the Queen released that message saying that they were sad that it's come to this, but they wished them well. But this was the first kind of physical time when we saw Harry, what it means to be on the outside. He came back for his grandmother's funeral, but he wasn't part of the club. He wasn't sitting right at the front. He wasn't allowed to wear his uniform. Meghan and Harry appeared to be ostracised, having ostracised themselves, frankly.
So, Kate, Prince Harry's almost 40. Can I ask you a sort of classic A-level history question,
right,
for which you'll get 20 marks and you must show you're working. Are we at a turning point, do you think?
I think turning 40 is a milestone in anybody's life, isn't it? Certainly was for me. You look back on what you've done, you look ahead and think, how much time have I got left? And am I achieving everything I want to achieve? I think it will be weighing on his mind. He's older than his mother was when she died. He also has time running out, possibly if he's contemplating his father's mortality. So we know that Charles is doing very well. He's back to full-time public duties. I mean, he's got a tour coming up in Australia. He's busy, but he has had cancer and has had a lot of treatment for that cancer. And, in his 70s, he's not getting any younger. If Harry wants to come back truly to have a better connection with the family, with the institution, and is perhaps having doubts about the way in which the split with the royal family happened, he needs to do it soon. Because it's not going to happen with King William on the throne. William and Harry, the relationship seems beyond repair. It doesn't look like there's ever a point that rift's going to be healed. It's certainly not in the short term, perhaps not in the long term. So if he wants to make amends, now's the time to do it. Turning 40 will focus your thoughts, as it does anybody. Having a parent who's ill will focus your thoughts on how best to spend your time whether you're going to see them, how much of time you're going to spend with them. And I think all this will be weighing on his mind as his children get older as well. What relationship will they have? Will they have any relationship at all with the rest of the royal family back here? And if not, will they start to ask questions as to why that is?
That's pull factors. What about push factors? I mean, have things changed on the Californian side of the ledger that might make a return to the UK, who knows, sort of more attractive?
You might start looking at about how successful that move has been. They might start thinking, well, the Netflix deal and various deals that they have, how well are they performing? The Spotify podcast deal seemed to go south. Even his relationship with Better Up, so he, is this kind of ambassador for this tech company. He's been criticised by somebody there. It does seem that the popularity of the Sussexes does appear to be on the wane. If you look at the opinion polls, that will be focusing the minds as well. Maybe that's why they're building their base, around the world. They've been to Colombia, they've been to Jamaica, they've been on big, high-profile foreign trips.
Pseudo-royal tours, essentially.
That's right. Exactly that. And to all intents and purposes, that's exactly what they look like. They're invited by the government of that country. It's all very high-level stuff. They're not going on holiday to meet a few people. It's not under the radar. It's all very much for show, to present themselves as a kind of brand. And we've got Meghan's project coming up. It's supposed to be a lifestyle brand, American Riviera Orchard. Still not clear what they do. She sent some jam and doggy biscuits out. So I think they're just they're finding their feet, but I think that the success of whether they can make it there will determine how, whether Harry will decide whether he's made the right choice.
And actually, there's also the question over all of this. I mean, not that we have a say, but do the British public want him back?
That's a good question. Certainly, it will be helpful from a royal family point of view to have more heavy lifting. You look at Princess Anne, who's still doing a lot. Duke of Gloucester, doesn't get much press, but he goes out and does so much work. So from that point of view, it would be helpful, you would think. But I don't think after everything they've done criticising the royal family, I'm not sure many people would welcome them to come back, to be honest.
If, he were to vanish tomorrow, Prince Harry, and just call it quits and go and live in a hermit in a cage somewhere, I mean, how would you look at these 40 years that he's had? I mean, what would the legacy of those be?
I think he's been extraordinarily, energetic. His service in the army for 10 years, you can't take that away from him. You look at the 10 years subsequently with the Invictus Games, that's been excellent. I think he should focus on the things that he does do really, really well. Maybe do some things behind the scenes a bit more. Look at the nuts and bolts of a charity and how that works. Focus on those sorts of things. I think that combining it with that kind of lavish Montecito lifestyle is a difficult sell.
Kate Mansey, assistant editor and royal editor of The Times. You'll find all her reporting at thetimes.com. If and only if you have a subscription, we'll pop a link to her latest story on Prince Harry in the description notes of this episode. Why not WhatsApp, text, or write out on a small piece of paper the link to this episode and send it to somebody who you think might enjoy it? The producer today was Will Rowe, the executive producer is Kate Ford, and sound design and theme composition is by Maula Seto. I'm Luke Jones, I'll see you soon.